Maybe it wasn't your imagination. Maybe that night, when the house was silent, and yet you felt something close to you. You were not alone. Maybe you remember the sound of his paws down the hallway. That soft, familiar rhythm, almost impossible to confuse. And even after he left, there was a strange moment, a short second, when you'd swear he passed by again. This video is to talk about just that. One of those invisible ways in which a dog can continue trying to comfort the person it loved the most. One of those small signs that many feel but almost never dare to tell. And why, when the pain presses harder, there are bonds that do not disappear. They only change shape. If you came this far with a tired chest, with saudade, with that feeling of emptiness left by his absence, this video can give you something that perhaps you needed for a long time: relief, meaning, and a different way of looking at what you are experiencing. Not to erase the pain, because that pain is real, but to understand that sometimes the deepest love does not end the day when everything seems to fall silent. Because losing a dog is not just losing a company. It is losing a living routine. It's opening the door and not seeing him waiting. It's looking at that corner of the house where you slept and feeling like something is missing even when everything is in its place. It is discovering that the silence of a house can also hurt. And perhaps that is why this topic hits so deep. Because many people don't just miss their dog. They also feel, at certain moments, that he is still around in a way that is difficult to explain. As if it accompanied, as if it protected, as if even today I was still trying to calm your sadness without making noise. And the strongest thing is that this video doesn't just talk about loss, talk about the bond. Of that bond that was built on simple things. When he followed you around the house, when he lay nearby without asking for anything, when he looked at you in silence and seemed to understand everything. We are going to talk about why these everyday gestures can leave such a deep mark that not even absence can extinguish. Because there are goodbyes that do not break love, they just make it invisible. And if you've ever felt like your dog is still trying to be with you when you need him most, what if you weren't imagining anything? But before we get to that answer, there is something that almost everyone who has truly loved a dog knows very well. And it starts inside the home. After a dog leaves, the house doesn't just get emptier, it looks different. It is not something that is noticeable from the outside. Nobody comes in and says, "Something is missing here." And yet, you feel it immediately. It's in the air, in the routine, in the small moments of the day that previously went unnoticed and now weigh more than you imagined. Because there are absences that make no noise when they arrive, but change everything. Maybe it happened to you in the morning. You opened your eyes, and for a second, your body followed its usual habit. Look to the side, wait for a movement, hearing that familiar sound of paws approaching, as if he knew exactly what time you woke up. But this time no one came. And that small detail was enough to remind you, again, that it is not like before. There begins a part of the duel that few people explain well. It's not just the memory of the last day that hurts. The daily repetition of his absence hurts. It hurts to walk through the door and not see it. It hurts to walk to the kitchen and not feel him following you. It hurts to look at the ground almost reflexively, so as not to trip over it, and realize that it is no longer necessary. It hurts to discover that a custom can remain alive, even when the presence is no longer there. That happens to many people, even though they hardly say it. Because a dog doesn't take up space alone in the house. Take up space in your way of living. It becomes part of your schedule without asking permission. And when it's gone, it's not just a beloved animal that disappears. An emotional choreography that your life repeated every day is broken. Maybe there's still a place in the house that feels weird. That corner where I slept, the blanket, the small space next to the sofa, the part of the floor where he would lay while you did whatever, like he just wanted to make sure you were there. And the most impressive thing is that those places do not immediately become empty. Sometimes they are loaded with memory, loaded with presence, loaded with a sensation that is difficult to explain, as if love had left a mark that cannot be erased just because the eyes no longer see it. Many people try to remain normal. Put away your things, tidy up the house, get back to the routine, respond to messages. He does what he has to do, but then comes a simple, completely ordinary moment, and everything comes back. It may be when you get home, you put the key, open the door, enter, and for a fraction of a second, when your heart goes ahead. As if I still expected to see him there, as if a part of you still believes that he is going to appear from some corner, wagging his tail, celebrating something as simple as your return. That moment lasts little, but it hits hard, because it is not born from logic. It is born from the bond. And that is where many people understand that grieving for a dog is much deeper than others imagine. It's not just about missing. It's about feeling that someone who was woven into your movements, your habits, and even your silences no longer responds in the same way. Maybe something even smaller happened to you too. Going to the bathroom and feeling like that shadow was missing, following you. Sitting down to eat and looking down, almost out of habit. Move from one room to another and notice that no one is accompanying you on that journey. Turn off the light at night and feel that silence weighs differently. They are everyday things, but that's precisely why they hurt so much. Because the greatest love is almost always built in small scenes, not only in extraordinary moments, also in everyday life. At the door, in the hallway, in the kitchen, in the sound of pause. In the body resting close to yours without asking for anything. In that calm look that without speaking seemed to say, I am with you. That's why when a dog leaves, it doesn't just take its presence with it. It also leaves echoes. Echoes in the time I ate. Echoes in the space where I waited. Echoes at the exact time he recognized your arrival. Echoes in the entire house, which continues to have the shape of him even though you can no longer hug him. And here is something very human, very real, that many people feel but do not dare to admit. Sometimes it's not just sadness. Sometimes it's the strange feeling that that routine didn't quite end. As if, at certain moments, something kept happening. As if the house still remembered him. As if certain places retained their intention. As if, when you are most down, something within that silence comes closer in a way that is almost impossible to explain. We are not talking about big signs yet, not even about things out of the ordinary. We are talking about those types of moments that seem normal on the outside, but on the inside they leave you thinking. A soft chill as you pass by your corner. An unexpected peace in the midst of very heavy sadness. The feeling of company just when you were going to break down. That impulse to look to the side, as if he were there again. There are those who try to ignore it. Some say it's just habit. And yes, the habit exists. Memory, too. But anyone who has deeply loved a dog knows that some sensations are not felt as simple habit. They feel close, warm, almost alive. And that confuses. Because a part of you understands absence. But another part continues to recognize something, not with the eyes, not with words, but with that most intimate area of the heart where true bonds live. Perhaps that is why grieving for a dog has such a special depth. Because they enter life without complicating it. They become home. They become a refuge. They become such a faithful presence that even when they are no longer physically present, the soul is slow to accept that it is no longer accompanied in the same way. And yet, there are people who feel that they did not stop being accompanied. Only now it happens differently. Quieter, more subtle, more invisible. And this is where this topic begins to touch something even deeper. Because when the routine is broken, when the house falls silent, and when the pain is mixed with small moments of presence, an idea arises that is difficult to say out loud, but that many people have secretly felt. That maybe your dog didn't completely disappear from your life, that maybe he's still trying to be close in the only way he can now. What if that comfort that appears in the worst moments was not just a memory, but a form of love that still accompanies you? Because there was a person who experienced something like that, in the middle of an ordinary night, and what he felt completely changed the way he understood his dog's departure. A woman told something that, at first, she didn't want to tell almost anyone. He had lost his dog after many years together. It wasn't just his dog. He was the one who waited for her every day at the door, who followed her around the house even when she went from room to room for no reason, who knew how to recognize before others when it was right and when it wasn't. After he left, the house fell into that kind of silence that doesn't seem like normal silence. Everything was still in its place: the furniture, the cup on the table, the keys, the routine. But something essential was missing. She said that the hardest thing had not been just saying goodbye. The hardest thing was returning home and feeling that no one welcomed her like before. Put the key in the lock and for a second, wait for the usual sound. That little excited run to the door. That body full of joy for E just seeing her come back. And every time that didn't happen, reality came crashing down on him again. For days he tried to be strong. He did what many people do. He got busy. He ordered things. He responded to messages. He tried to continue. But inside she was broken. Not for drama, not by exaggeration, but because there are pains that do not need to make a scandal to be immense. One night, after a particularly hard day, he sat on the living room sofa with that feeling of tiredness that does not come from the body, but from the soul. I didn't feel like talking to anyone. She did not want to explain to anyone why she continued crying for a dog, when for her it had not been just another dog, but rather a constant, loyal, silent presence deeply linked to her life. The house was still. So still that you could hear that type of silence that appears when there is nothing left to distract the heart. And then something small happened. It wasn't a vision. It wasn't something exaggerated. It was not a strange scene. It was a sensation. She felt with a clarity that was difficult to explain, as if something settled near her feet, exactly where he used to lie down when he saw her sad. Exactly at that point on the ground where he rested so many times without asking for anything, just to keep him company. He remained motionless, not out of fear, for recognition, because the body sometimes remembers before the mind, and at that moment he didn't think, "I'm imagining things." He thought something much more intimate, much more immediate. He thought, "It's you." The most curious thing is that, according to her, she did not feel anguish. He felt relief, as if for a few seconds the pain eased, as if the sadness was still there, yes, but accompanied, as if someone had come not to erase the wound, but to sustain it from within that silence. She doubted herself afterwards. He tried to explain it rationally. Maybe it was custom. Maybe it was body memory. Maybe it was the very strong desire to feel him close. And it may be that part of all that was there. But there is something that marked her more than the sensation itself. That's what happened next. That night, for the first time since her dog had left, she was able to cry without despairing. It wasn't a breakup cry. It was different. As if in the midst of the pain, a kind of calm had appeared. As if, instead of sinking, someone had helped her through that moment. Not with words, not with big signs, not with visible proof, with presence. Since then, he began to look at certain small moments in a different way that he would have previously dismissed. The impulse to turn your head toward the hallway, the feeling of company on the most difficult nights, that sudden peace that came just when his chest was closing, the dreams where he didn't seem to be remembering it, but rather finding it. And that's what makes this story so powerful. He doesn't try to prove anything. It doesn't force anyone to believe. It doesn't turn pain into a spectacle. It just shows something that many people live in silence. After losing their dog, they begin to notice moments in which the bond does not seem to have been completely broken. Discrete moments, almost invisible, but deeply real for those who feel them. And perhaps that touches so deeply because the dogs in life already comforted us without words. They did it by lying nearby, looking at each other in silence, waiting for us, following us around the house, sensing our state even when we tried to hide it. So, when a person feels comfort after his departure, the question appears alone within the heart. If throughout his life he knew when you needed him, why would that love have to disappear just when its absence hurts you the most? That changes something inside. Because grief is no longer just a story of loss. It also begins to become a story of continuity. Not a visible continuity like before. Not a continuity that you can touch with your hands. But there is an emotional, spiritual, intimate continuity. As if the link found another way to continue reaching you. And here, the first major break in this video occurs. Until now, we have talked about the house, the habit, the silence, the routine that was damaged. But when stories like this appear, when someone feels comfort right in the exact place where their dog used to be, we are no longer just talking about everyday memory. We are talking about something more delicate, of the possibility that certain links do not end at the same point where the body ends, and that is not a light idea. It is an idea that touches a very deep need of the human being, the need to believe that authentic love leaves a mark that does not fade from one day to the next. That's why so many people are moved when they hear stories like this, because deep down, they are not looking for a perfect explanation. They search for meaning. They seek to understand why, in the midst of absence, there are still moments in which the heart recognizes company. They seek to understand why some low parts of the house feel alive. They seek to understand why, when they are about to break down, a calm appears that is too similar to the one their dog gave them when he was by their side. And perhaps that is the most human point of all. Sometimes you don't need a big sign to feel like someone still cares for you. Sometimes a peace that comes just in time is enough, with a soft sensation on the verge of crying, with that moment when the pain doesn't go away, but you stop feeling so alone. If something like this has ever happened to you, even for a second, you know that it is not like any other memory. It looks like an invisible caress. And the most difficult thing comes later, because when a person experiences something like this, an internal conflict arises that can split them in two. One part wants to believe what they felt, and another part tries to deny it so as not to suffer anymore. And there begins one of the most difficult parts of all this. Not sadness, not the saudade, not the silence of the house, the doubt. Because when a person feels something they can't explain after losing their dog, they almost always feel divided inside. A part of him wants to embrace that moment, save it, believe that there was something real there. But the other side defends itself. It hardens. Try to put distance, try to say, no, that can't be. And that conflict is tiring. It's tiring because it doesn't happen outside. It happens inside. On the one hand, there is the heart, which recognizes, who remembers perfectly what his way of accompanying you was like. How he approached without making a sound, how he lay nearby on heavy days, how he looked at you in that strange, deep way, as if he understood more about you than anyone else could. On the other, there is the mind, which wants to order everything. He wants to explain it. He wants to protect you. He wants to avoid a new wound. Then the internal dialogue begins. It was my imagination. It was habit. It was because I miss him too much. It was because I need to feel him close. It was just my head trying to ease the pain. And yes, sometimes the mind does that. Sometimes love leaves habit so strong that the body continues to react as if the other were still there. But the problem is that some experiences don't feel like habit. They feel precise. They arrive at the exact moment, with the same peace, with the same tenderness, with that silent closeness that you knew too well. And that's why it hurts so much, not knowing what to do with what you felt. Because if you deny it completely, you feel like you're betraying something very intimate. But if you accept it, another fear appears. The fear of holding on. The fear of not letting go. The fear that others won't understand. The fear of appearing weak for continuing to feel so much for someone who, for many, was just an animal. And there the grief becomes even lonelier. Because you are not fighting absence alone. You are also struggling with the need to justify your pain, with the need to explain why you still look towards his place. Why are you still talking about him? Why there are still days when a simple memory breaks you? Why do you still feel that some of his presence hasn't completely left? Many people keep this part quiet because they know what it sounds like from the outside. They know that there are those who minimize. There are those who change the subject. That there are those who do not understand the depth of a bond like that. But those who really lived that relationship with their dog know that it was not something superficial. It wasn't just company. It wasn't just custom. It wasn't just affection. It was a daily, concrete, constant form of love. A love made of steps following you around the house, waiting at the door, of shared silences, of ordinary mornings that became better just because he was there, of difficult nights that weighed less because his body rested close to yours. That is why doubt does not arise from anything. It is born precisely because what existed was very profound. And there is a memory that for many people returns again and again in the midst of that conflict, a memory that cannot be erased, a memory that seems to stay suspended somewhere in the chest, the last day. Maybe you still remember it with painful clarity, the way he breathed, the way he looked at you, the strange atmosphere of that moment, the feeling that time was becoming too fragile, and above all, that silent look, that look that so many describe the same, even if they have never met each other, as if the dog wanted to say something, as if he knew, as if there were in his eyes a sad and deep calm that went beyond the moment. Many people keep that look like a wound, but also like a mystery, because it wasn't just any look. It was one of those looks that stay alive inside you, not because of the drama, but because of what it seemed to contain. There are people who feel that, on that last day, their dog was not just saying goodbye. I was also leaving something behind, a kind of message without words, a faux signature of love concentrated in an instant, as if he wanted to ensure that, even afterward, a part of his presence would continue to accompany him. That, of course, cannot be proven. But it is felt, and what is truly felt, although it cannot be measured, also transforms a person's life. That is why this internal conflict is so strong, because you're not choosing between fantasy and reality. You are trying to understand an emotional experience that touched something very deep in you, something that does not entirely fit into cold explanations, something that has more to do with the link than with logic, more to do with the mark it left on you than with what others think from the outside. Maybe that's why, when you remember that last look, you don't just feel sadness, you also feel that there was something more, something you couldn't understand at the time. Something that today, with time, returns in another way, in a sudden peace, in a feeling of company, in that brief relief that comes just when you need it most, as if that look had not just been dismissed, as if it had also been a silent promise of permanence. And this is where the heart begins to open a possibility that the mind still does not know how to accept. That perhaps certain dogs, due to the depth of love they built with their human, are not limited to being present only as long as they can be seen. That perhaps, later, they continue to arrive in more subtle ways, not to scare, not to confuse you, not to prevent you from continuing to live, but to do the same thing they always did, accompany you when you need it most. That completely changes the question. It's no longer just about, am I imagining things? It is something much more intimate. What if the love we shared was so real that it found another way to stay? That idea, alone, can move everything inside. Because if the bond continues, then the silence of the house is no longer just empty. It can also be a space of presence. If the bond continues, then certain moments of calm are not simple emotional accidents. They can be gestures, they can be closeness, they can be comfort. And yet, before accepting that, something inside many people resists. Because accepting that there is still a bond also forces us to accept another very profound truth. That what they experienced with their dog was much greater than what they had understood while he was alive. And when that truth is revealed, you are no longer looking at just a loss. You are beginning to look at a connection that may never have been entirely dependent on the body. And that revelation changes the meaning of everything. There is something that many people only understand after their dog is gone. While he was alive, it seemed simple. It was company. It was routine. It was honey. He was someone who was there every day. But when it's gone, all that changes size. What seemed every day begins to reveal something much deeper. Because a dog doesn't just share space with you, it syncs with you, with your schedules, with your energy, with your emotional states, with your silences. There are days when you yourself don't know how to explain what you feel, but he perceived it. He approached without asking questions. He stayed close without demanding anything. And somehow, without words, he managed to calm something inside you. That is not coincidental. That's connection. And when such a connection is repeated for years, it leaves a mark that does not depend solely on the physical body. It is installed elsewhere, in a deeper part where the link does not need to be seen to continue to be felt. Therefore, when he leaves, not everything disappears at the same time. The body leaves, the routine changes, the house is silent, but the connection takes time to go. Or maybe it doesn't go away. Maybe it transforms. And this is where many people begin to reinterpret things that they did not understand before. That feeling of company when you're down. That calm that appears for no clear reason. That impulse to look towards a specific place in the house. That moment when the pain becomes more bearable, for no apparent reason. They don't feel like normal memories. They feel like something active. As if the bond was still doing what it always did. Taking care of you. Because if you think about it, your dog never needed to talk to comfort you. He never needed to explain anything to you. His way of loving was to be. Be close. Be present. Be with you in the good times. And above all, in the difficult times. So when someone feels that same kind of presence after they are gone, even if it is subtle, the body recognizes it before the mind. Recognize the pattern. Recognize the intention. Recognize the type of calm. And that opens up a possibility that is not logical, but deeply human. That the bond didn't just depend on you being able to see it. That maybe what they built together was stronger than the physical form in which it existed. Here is something important that many people feel, but do not always know how to express. Dogs don't just pass through our lives. They pass through us. They are integrated into our way of feeling, in our way of being in the world, in how we face the good days, and above all, the difficult days. That is why his absence is not empty. It's dense, full of memories, yes, but also full of something else, something that continues to react when you need it. And at this point in the journey, there is a phrase that many people feel is true, even if they have never thought of it that way before. Maybe he didn't leave. Maybe he just learned to stay in a different way. That idea changes everything. It does not eliminate the pain. It does not erase the absence. It does not replace the hug that you can no longer give. But it transforms the meaning of what you are experiencing. Because it stops being just a loss. It is also beginning to be a continuity. A silent continuity. Invisible, but emotionally real. And that doesn't mean living trapped in the past. It means recognizing that there are bonds that leave such a deep mark that they do not behave like other farewells, that continue to appear at key moments, that continue to generate calm, that they continue, in some way, fulfilling the same role they had when they were physically with you. Take care of yourself. Accompany you. Hold on to what you don't say. That's why so many people, over time, stop seeing those moments as something strange and begin to see them as something consistent with the type of love they experienced. Because if there was a being who accompanied you every day without fail, who looked for you when you were bad, that came just when you needed it most, then it is not so absurd to feel that, even afterwards, something of that presence continues to act in the same way, not from the body, but yes, from the link. And just when that idea begins to settle, when it stops feeling impossible and begins to feel familiar, something important happens within the person who is grieving. Pain is no longer just a rupture. It also begins to be a connection. Not a connection like before, not a visible connection, but it is a connection that responds, that appears, accompanying, that at certain moments seems to know exactly when you need it. And that sets the stage for the deepest part of this whole process. Because if that presence continues in some way, then we are no longer just talking about memory. We're talking about something that, for many, feels like a form of real comfort, even in absence. And this is where everything begins to touch an even deeper layer, because it's one thing to miss, another thing is to remember. It is quite another to feel, in the midst of your pain, that there is still a presence that tries to help you continue. Not in a big way, not in a spectacular way, not like something that comes to break reality, but in the same way that many dogs always loved, with discretion, with perseverance, with a fidelity so silent that sometimes it was only understood with the heart. Maybe that's why so many people describe something similar when they grieve for their dog. They don't necessarily talk about seeing something. They talk about feeling something, an unexpected peace, a calm that comes just when they were about to collapse, a kind of invisible hug in a moment of absolute fragility, as if, for a moment, the sadness was still there, but she stopped feeling completely alone. And that changes a lot. Because when a person experiences several moments like this, even if they are small, they begin to notice a pattern, not a logical pattern, an emotional pattern, something that is repeated just at the moments when it needs containment the most, when the chest tightens, when silence weighs too much, when the house seems emptier than ever, when the memory of the last day comes back with force. That's when, suddenly, a soft feeling of company appears. And then an idea is born that previously seemed impossible, but that begins to feel intimately true. That his dog was not only part of his life, it can also continue to be part of your comfort. That has enormous spiritual weight, because it forces you to look at the link from another place, no longer just as a beautiful story that existed and ended, but as a connection that left a living mark. A connection that perhaps does not depend entirely on the subject. A connection that, through the depth of shared love, still finds ways to touch your core. Not to stop your path. Not to tie you to pain. Not to stop you from moving forward. But to help you go through what is most difficult for you to go through. Like he did before. Because that's the most moving thing of all. Many dogs spent their lives trying to relieve their human without making a sound. They would sleep nearby when they saw you sad. They followed you when they felt you restless. They waited for you at the door as if returning were a daily miracle. They looked at you with an attention that didn't ask for an explanation. They knew how to accompany. They knew how to take care. They knew how to stay. So, to think that that love can continue to manifest in an invisible way, it does not contradict what they were. On the contrary, it is consistent with the very essence of the bond. It's almost as if he were saying, if I took care of you while I could stay by your side, why would I stop trying now? And that possibility doesn't feel empty. It feels deeply comforting because it doesn't make the loss something less. He does not deny the absence. It doesn't erase the emptiness of the place where I slept. It does not eliminate the impulse to look for it at the door, in the hallway, in routine. But it gives new meaning to certain grief experiences. It gives meaning to that sudden calm, to that feeling of company, to those dreams in which not everything seems nostalgia, but rather an encounter, to those moments when the heart calms down without knowing why. Many people need to hear this to stop fighting with what they felt. Because they spent weeks, months, sometimes years, telling themselves that they were exaggerating, that it was all imagination, that it was better to keep quiet so as not to appear fragile, that no one would understand why a dog could continue to take up so much space in their emotional life. But the truth is that it does occupy that space. And he occupies it because the love was real, not superficial, not passenger, not replaceable, real. The kind of love that reorganizes an entire house. That changes the way you arrive, sleep, rest, and go through your days. That gets into the corners of routine and fills them with meaning. That turns a presence into a home. That's why when someone comments something like, "I felt peace just when I was crying for him," or "I dreamed about my dog and I woke up as if he had really come to calm me down," or "At the worst moment, I felt that I was not entirely alone." It's not always about fantasy. Sometimes it is talking about an emotional and spiritual experience that does not need to be demonstrated to be transformative. And maybe you yourself have experienced something like this. Maybe there was a night when you sat overcome by saudade, and without understanding how, something inside you loosened. Maybe you walked into a room with a heavy heart, and for a few seconds you felt a closeness that was impossible to explain. Maybe in the middle of a crisis, exactly the kind of calm that he gave you when he lay next to you appeared. That is not forgotten. Because it doesn't look like any memory. It looks like care. It looks like love in motion. He looks like someone who, even though he's not like before, is still trying to keep the same silent promise as always, to be with you. And there, the grief begins to truly transform. Not because it stops hurting, but because it is no longer just a place of absence. It is also beginning to be a place of bonding. A place where love continues to come in another way. A place where memory not only hurts, it also sustains. A place where spirituality does not appear as empty discourse, but as an intimate possibility that is born from the real experience of thousands of people. That's why this topic hits so deep. Because deep down, we are not just talking about dogs. We are talking about the continuity of love when it has been pure, faithful, and everyday. We're talking about that kind of relationship that didn't need words to be profound. We are talking about a bond that even after death seems to refuse to become just the past. And there is something very beautiful in that. To think that your dog was not reduced to an immobile memory. To think that perhaps when he finds you most vulnerable, he continues to reach out to you in the only way he can now. Bodiless, noiseless, no visible steps down the hallway, but with the same intention, with the same tenderness, with the same desire to relieve you. Maybe that's why some people, after a lot of pain, stop asking for tests and start simply observing. They observe when that peace comes. They observe what they feel in certain corners of the house. They observe dreams that leave them comfort instead of anguish. They observe that, in the darkest moments, there is still a form of companionship that they cannot name. But they can recognize. And recognizing that doesn't make them weak. It makes them honest with what they love. It makes them sensitive to a truth that does not always enter into words. That some bonds, when born from such deep loyalty, do not end where visible life ends. They continue. They change, yes. They become subtle, yes. They become invisible, yes. But they continue. And when that idea finally enters the heart, a different hope is born. Not a naive hope, not a denial of grief, not a fantasy to escape pain, a mature hope. The hope that the love shared with your dog had a greater meaning than you imagined. The hope that his presence was not a passing accident in your life. The hope that what they built together left a continuity. The hope that, even today, can still reach you. And maybe that's why so many people end up saying something they never thought they would say at the beginning of their grief. I no longer feel alone. I lost it. I also feel that, in some way, it still accompanies me. If you ever felt something similar, write it in the comments with one word. It accompanies me. Because sometimes, when we share these experiences, we discover that we are not crazy. We are recognizing a love that is still alive in another way. But there is something even deeper to understand. Because when a dog continues to comfort his human even in absence, perhaps he is not only showing that there is still a bond, perhaps he is revealing that that bond was never a single life, nor a single moment, nor a single farewell. Maybe now you can go back to that first image. The house in silence, the empty hallway, the night falling slowly over the same corners as always. And yet, that strange feeling, as if something soft had passed near you. At first it seemed like just pain, just habit, just saudade playing with memory. But after everything we've seen, maybe that scene doesn't feel the same anymore. Because maybe it wasn't just absence. Maybe it was a different form of presence. And that profoundly changes the way a person grieves. Not because I stop missing, not because the emptiness disappears, not because the place where I slept stops hurting when you look at it, but because love also begins to occupy that space that previously seemed taken only by loss. Now the imagined sound of their paws around the house no longer has to be just a wound. It can also be living memory. It can also be the echo of a bond that continues to find ways to touch you, to get closer, to remind you that not everything ended in the last breath, nor in the last day, nor in the last time you hugged him. Because there are relationships that were not small. And when a bond was built with so much loyalty, so much shared routine, and so much silent love, perhaps it doesn't break like other things break. Maybe it remains, not visible, not measurable, not easy to explain, but present in those moments when you need it most, in that sudden peace, in that relief that you don't know where it came from, in that dream that did not leave you anguish but comfort, in that feeling of company that comes just when you were about to break. Perhaps that is why many people feel, over time, that their dog did not disappear from their history. It just changed shape inside of her. He no longer runs to the door. You no longer hear him walking around the house. He no longer physically lies in his corner. But some of his love continues to serve the same function. Stay with you. And that doesn't make the pain any less real. It makes it more sacred. Because then you understand that your sadness does not exist only because of the loss. It exists because what you experienced was true, deep, unrepeatable. And precisely for that reason, he left a mark that does not fit entirely within a farewell. Maybe that's the real heart of this whole video. Don't try to prove the invisible, but to give value to what the heart recognizes when it truly loves. Recognize that there are dogs that not only shared a stage with you, they shared soul with you. They became a refuge. They became emotional language. They became part of the way you yourself learned to feel accompanied in this world. And when a bond reaches that level, perhaps death does not have the last word on everything. The visible form can be worn. You can impose silence in the house. It can leave a chair, a blanket, a corner, and a routine hurt. But it does not always manage to extinguish the intention of love. And maybe that's what you still feel. Not an illusion, not a hoax, not a denial, but the continuity of a bond that still tries to reach you. The way you now can, invisible, soft, faithful, as it always was. Therefore, if something small, almost impossible to tell, has ever happened to you, don't dismiss it so quickly. That moment when you felt peace without explanation. That moment when you looked at his place and felt not only emptiness, but also closeness. That night when you were crying and suddenly something inside you calmed down like you weren't alone. Sometimes the purest love doesn't need to be shown strongly. It is enough for him to show up just in time. And maybe that's the truest way your dog is still trying to comfort you. Not interrupting your life, not holding you back in pain, not asking you to stay in the past, but helping you walk with a new certainty that what they experienced was not a coincidence, that his love was not small, and that certain ties are born with a depth that not even death can turn into a simple memory. Then, return once again to that memory of the beginning, the sound of their paws through the house. Maybe today, you no longer hear it with your ears. But maybe you still listen to it with that part of your soul where the bonds live that never completely end. And maybe, just maybe, every time you feel that inexplicable calm in the midst of sadness, it's not because you're letting it go. It's because he still found a way to get to you. If your heart felt this message, write in the comments. The link continues. And tell me the name of your dog. Because when we share his name, his love has a place among us again, and other people discover that they are not going through this alone. Because in the end, perhaps the house did remain silent, but not empty.